Nicole's relationship with her mother-in-law did not work out. At first, she naively believed that she would be able to make friends with Mrs. Robinson and tried her best to establish contact with the woman. But very soon Nicole realized that all her efforts were useless because Samuel's mother would never be pleased with any woman near her son except herself. Mrs. Robinson was selfish and loved her son to the point of madness, and Nicole had to put up with that. Nicole herself grew up in a simple family. Her father was a tractor driver, and her mother worked at the post office. Nicole came to the city from a small village to get an education. In her first year of college, she met Samuel. At 18, she was already a serious girl. She knew what she wanted from life. To avoid asking her parents for money, she earned a part-time job as a waitress in a cafe. Nicole dedicated the rest of her time to her education because she knew that if she got an education, she'd be able to get back on her feet faster and live her life to the fullest. Samuel was a city boy, the only son of his mother, whom she raised alone. Spoiled by his mother's love and affection, Samuel nevertheless grew up to be a good-natured and well-mannered young man. When he saw Nicole at one of the student parties, he immediately fell in love with her. He was captivated by her modesty, proud, serious look, and self-confidence. Samuel immediately realized that such a girl should not be missed and immediately began to act. At first, Nicole tried to keep Samuel at a distance, but then, realizing that he was serious, she could no longer resist his advances. They began dating, and everything was fine until Samuel introduced Nicole to his mother. Of course, he was sure that his mother would not be thrilled by this news, because she was used to the fact that her son belonged only to her, but he still hoped that she would be able to appreciate Nicole properly. And if at the first meeting Mrs. Robinson did not show openly her attitude for Nicole, everything changed when he told her that he was going to marry her. "Samuel, have you lost your mind?" exclaimed his mother indignantly. "You have to take your choice of wife seriously." "Mother, Nicole is a wonderful, decent girl, and I love her. What about Monica, or don't you care about my opinion? Her mother and I have dreamed all these years that you two would finally be together." "Mom, Monica and I are childhood friends. You may have something planned, but I'll figure out my personal life without you." Mrs. Robinson realized it was time to bring her main weapon into play and, squeezing out a tear, declared, "You don't care about your mother's opinion. I've devoted my whole life to you, and now in gratitude, you're going to bring some commoner into our house. Do you even know who her parents are? No, son, that's not the bride I raised you for." Mrs. Robinson dropped her head in her hands and shook silently, imitating violent sobs. But Samuel had already learned all of his mother's tricks so well over the years, and knew that this was just a show. So he stood up and headed for the exit. Turning around, he said that he would marry Nicole anyway, and she would have to accept her if she wanted to be a part of his life. Samuel walked out, slamming the door, and Mrs. Robinson looked up with dry eyes and realized for the first time that her son had become an adult. The woman sighed and realized that she would have to put up with it. When the wedding day came, Mrs. Robinson went into her son's room, and seeing her handsome boy in his wedding suit, she couldn't help herself and tried again to talk to him. "Son, don't swear, but listen to your mother for the last time. Just be careful, always be on your guard. All these country girls are so sly. You can't even look back before you lose your apartment and money, or she cheats on you. You can expect anything from them. They're used to surviving. Do you understand me?" Samuel looked at her regretfully and said sharply, "Mom, that's enough. I have to go. The woman I love is waiting for me." Mrs. Robinson had to put up with it again. The whole time the marriage ceremony was going on, she sat with her lips pressed together, not uttering a word for the rest of the evening. After the wedding, the young couple began to live their lives, and Mrs. Robinson still couldn't calm down. Every time she came to their house, she tried to make a remark to Nicole, but she paid no attention, understanding that in this battle there would be no winners. Samuel saw all that and was grateful to his wife for her wisdom and patience. 3 years had passed, but Mrs. Robinson still could not accept the fact that her son had chosen a wife against her will. Finally, she found what she thought was a good reason to pick on Nicole. One day, choosing a time when her daughter-in-law was not at home, she came to Samuel to have a serious talk. "Look, son, it's been so long, and you still don't have any children. Do you realize that this is not normal? Your Nicole must be infertile, or just doesn't want kids." "Mum, don't start again. We just want to live for ourselves for now." "Ah, well, you know better than me. I was just asking." Mrs. Robinson hastened to end the conversation. From now on, she decided to act cunningly and not stir up conflict with her son, but the idea that her daughter-in-law didn't want children was firmly lodged in her mind. She began to have trouble sleeping at night, even losing weight, trying to figure out how to solve the problem. And then one day, lingering at her friend Ruby's house, Mrs. Robinson told her about her trouble. "Is that trouble?" smiled Ruby. "If your daughter-in-law's health is all right, we'll solve it quickly. I know a herb. You will put it in her tea. Tomorrow I'll ask my aunt the name because I forget." The very next day, Mrs. Robinson went to visit her son. At that moment, Ruby called her, and Mrs. Robinson locked herself in the kitchen so that her daughter-in-law would not hear the conversation. Nicole thought it was strange and, suspecting something amiss, went to the door to overhear the conversation. "Are you sure she'll get pregnant if I put this herb in her tea?" whispered Mrs. Robinson quietly. "Yes, it's been tested on my relatives more than once. It increases the general vitality, awakens sexuality, and most importantly, it is absolutely safe," explained Ruby. Nicole immediately understood what her mother-in-law was up to, and she was glad she could find out about her plans. When Mrs. Robinson told her that she had signed up at a fitness club near their house and would now come to their house every day for tea, she was not even surprised. The first day, Nicole noticed the woman slipping something into her cup. But Nicole switched mugs while the woman turned away, and did so whenever Mrs. Robinson visited. This went on for 2 months, and Nicole had a lot of fun watching the changes that were happening to her mother-in-law. The woman visibly became prettier, cheerful, changed her hair, smiled mysteriously, and constantly texted with someone on the phone. Finally, Samuel realized as well that something was going on with his mother. "Mom, what's the matter with you? You've changed so much lately." "What's the big deal? Isn't your mother a woman?" giggled Mrs. Robinson coquettishly and kissed her son on the cheek, leaving a bright red lipstick mark on his cheek. "It's just that I've met someone." Samuel rounded his eyes in amazement. He had long wished his mother had met a decent man on her path, a man she could devote all her energy to. Their neighbour Carl had been courting her for a long time, but Mrs. Robinson had never noticed anything, and now it turned out that his mother had finally opened her eyes and accepted his advances, deciding that her son had his own worries, and it was time to think about herself. What's more, they were going to get married. "Isn't it a little early?" laughed Samuel. "No, just in time," retorted the mother. "I want a real wedding, and then we're flying away for a month on a honeymoon." "So, that's great. We're so happy for you," said Nicole. Mrs. Robinson looked at her daughter-in-law for the first time with kind eyes and, smiling warmly, said, "Thanks, honey. Me too." The wedding was great. Mrs. Robinson was stunning in a long white, straight-cut dress. Her beautiful daughter-in-law and her beloved son were beside her. Nicole's parents were also invited. Mrs. Robinson finally saw that they were nice people, and she could not understand how she could not have noticed it before. After the wedding, the newlyweds went on vacation, and 3 weeks later the phone rang in their room. It was Nicole. She politely asked how the newlyweds were doing, but Samuel's mother could hear in her voice that she could hardly hide her excitement, and she was overwhelmed with emotion. "Is something happened, darling? Well, tell me," asked the woman excitedly. "You're definitely going to love it. We didn't want to tell you before until we were sure. I'm pregnant. It's 17 weeks already." It was a gift one could only dream of. The woman sat smiling, still not believing her happiness. "Nicole, finally! I'm so happy." "Wait, that's not all," laughed the daughter-in-law. "Are you standing or sitting there? You'd better sit down, because we are going to have twins." Samuel's mother was overcome with a flurry of emotion, and she raised her eyes to the sky, thanking the Lord for such a miracle. Nicole gave birth to absolutely healthy boys. Grandparents were constantly arguing about whose turn it was to hold their grandchildren and who they looked more like. Sometimes Samuel even joked that they purposely gave birth to 2 at once, otherwise the grandparents would not share one grandchild. One day the mother-in-law did tell her daughter-in-law about her special tea and her contribution to the birth of her grandchildren. But Nicole decided not to tell her the truth. The main thing was that everyone was happy in the end, and everything worked out as good as possible.